Okay. We are live streaming, and I will get us started. Okay, hold on.
Welcome, everyone. I have the honor of hosting tonight. My name is Elena Gaona. I'm Director of Communications at Catholic Climate Covenant. Thank you for joining us today. And we just need to share some important information for Spanish language attendees. Bienvenidos a todos los participantes que hablan español. Tenemos traducción simultánea en español durante este evento. La interpretación solo funciona si está participando a través de Zoom. Haga clic en el icono del mundo en la esquina derecha de su pantalla y escoja Spanish. También se incluirá la grabación de la interpretación en español con el correo electrónico que mandaremos en los próximos días. Si tiene cualquier pregunta o necesita ayuda, puede mandar una pregunta en la cajita que dice Q y A. Y si lo está viendo en YouTube, puede mandar un mensaje a info@catholiclimatecovenant.org. Esta era la pantalla para la interpretación. That was the Spanish interpretation slide. So now some housekeeping rules in English. This session is being recorded and the link will be sent to everyone who registered within a day or so. If you're on Zoom, please type your questions in the Q&A box. And if you're watching the live stream on our YouTube channel, please email your questions to info@catholicclimatecovenant.org. And we have the chat available for us to get to know each other. Please use it for good and do not use it to submit your questions. We request that everyone be civil, and we won't be able to save the chat. But if you have questions, please submit them via the Q&A box. If you put them in the chat, we might miss them. So we're going to start with an opening prayer from St. Francis of Assisi. Make me an instrument of your peace. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. So tonight, we have the Community Resilience and Empowerment session. This biennial conference series, Laudato Si in the U.S. Catholic Church, is co-sponsored by Creighton University and Catholic Climate Covenant to equip and inspire Catholics to more deeply integrate Laudato Si and its creation care teachings into the U.S. Church. This year, we've focused our conference so far, which ends next week, has focused on the Laudato Si goals of response to the cry of the earth, response to the cry of the poor, ecological economics, adoption of sustainable lifestyles, ecological education, ecological spirituality, and community engagement and participation. We also, Catholic Climate Covenant, has coordinated the Laudato Si Action Platform in the U.S. through our God's Planet initiative, and Creighton University is a platform signatory. We invite you to visit our website, godsplanet.us, as you explore ways to engage with the Laudato Si Action Platform. And now we get to tonight's goal. And not because I'm lucky enough to moderate this session, but because our whole conference integrates the idea of being stronger together. I'm particularly partial to tonight's session, Community Resilience and Empowerment. Speaking specifically and personally as a child of immigrants, I know the power of this goal. The Laudato Si Action Platform states about this goal. Community resilience and empowerment envisage a synodal journey of community engagement and participatory action at various levels. Actions could include promoting advocacy and developing people's campaigns, encouraging rootedness and a sense of belonging in local communities and neighborhood ecosystems. So I'm so honored tonight to be working with these three amazing people for our session: Reverend John Bowman, Director of Faith in Action International and co-founder of Pacific Institute for Community Organizations; Reverend Tanya Knock, co-chair for the Care for Creation Committee within Hope; and Dwayne David Paw, contributing writer at National Catholic Reporter and co-founder of Religion and Revolt. Welcome to the three of you. And tonight we're going to start with some words from Reverend John Bowman. So I'd like to introduce him a little bit further. Father Bowman co-founded Faith in Action, formerly PICO, and led the organization as the executive director for 36 years until 2009, when he transitioned to the position of founder and PICO Director of Special Projects, which includes oversight of international work. Under Father John's leadership, PICO steadily grew to serve a U.S. network of 50 faith-based community organizations in over 150 cities and 21 states, and 5 international locations. Through these interfaith, multi-ethnic organizations, more than 1 million families are involved in the work of community organizing to address the needs they are identifying in their local communities. His honorary degrees include Doctor of Humane Letters from Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles and the University of San Francisco, and the degree of Public Service from Santa Clara University. He received the Senior Sister Margaret Cafferty Development of People Award from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development and the Robert M. Holstein Faith Doing Justice Award from the Ignatian Solidarity Network. Father Bowman, welcome, and I will be sharing Father Bowman's slides.
Thank you, Elena. And I'm also honored to be on this panel with Reverend Tanya and Dwayne. So for tonight, I've been asked to talk about the theological foundations of community resilience and empowerment that underpin Laudato Si Action Platform goal. So next slide. The theological foundations of community resilience and empowerment have their roots in Scripture and Catholic social teaching. First, let me explain how I understand resilience and empowerment. Next slide. Resilience and empowerment is not an abstract concept. It comes through community organizing, which gives people of faith the tools that they need to fight for justice and work toward a more equitable society. Community resilience is a process where people learn to trust one another. It starts with one-to-one contacts, that is, building relationships, together do community education and research, and then mobilize to take action. I'll give an example of resilience from our Faith in Action affiliate in the North and Northeast areas or departments of Haiti. The Haitian people are experiencing a dysfunctional government, corruption, and violence. However, for nearly 10 years, groups of leaders from local churches have stuck together and have grown to understand that no one will do it for them. Finding the few resources that they have, they built cooperatives to feed their families. And now today, they have grown to a bigger effort where 65 church-based communities are meeting with US aid to press for investment in small-scale farmers to provide seeds, tools, and irrigation. And community empowerment comes through acting together. It starts with leaders who learn to stand up and be heard. It is sustained through support for one another when public leaders try to discredit their intent. Their efforts are supported by faith where people reflect on their biblical values, not just on Sunday at worship or privately through prayer, but publicly through proclaiming that together we are a community of faith acting for justice. Their actions bring about change for their families and for their communities. I'll give another example from Haiti. The same organization in Haiti joined with the Haitian diaspora and friends here in the United States and moved the Biden administration to change US policy, to redirect aid to local community-led development and strengthen small-scale agriculture. Next slide. I mentioned in my introduction that the theological basis for the goal of community resilience and empowerment is rooted in various biblical texts. Here are some examples. The book of Genesis establishes a theological framework for understanding humanity's role in God's creation. It suggests that all creation is a gift from God, and we humans have responsibility to care for and steward the earth. Creation is ongoing. In a sense, we are co-creators with God. In the opening session of this conference, Christina spoke about how our earth is in trouble due to both human action and inaction. And then during the 4th of July weekend, we saw headlines about global heat records raising alarms on climate change. And then the past few days from around the world, we've heard stories of health issues related to the extreme heat that we're experiencing. So in response to these crises, Laudato Si recognizes community organizing as a vital tool for mobilizing people, building solidarity, and affecting positive change related to ecological crises we face. It serves as a call to action for individuals, communities, institutions, and governments to make significant changes to protect our planet and promote the well-being of all people, especially the marginalized. In the Exodus story, God empowers Moses and the Israelites to challenge the oppression of Pharaoh and the Egyptian empire. They spoke truth to power. Laudato Si urges us to be prophets and speak to those in positions of influence and authority, to acknowledge their responsibility in caring for the planet and to work towards creating a more sustainable and just world. Laudato Si urges us to speak truth to power. Micah 6:8 says to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Both Laudato Si and Micah share a common theme of promoting responsible stewardship of the earth and caring for all the well-being of humanity. They emphasize three fundamental principles: doing justice, treating others equitably and standing against injustice and oppression, loving kindness, showing compassion and mercy to others, walking humbly with God, recognizing our dependence on God and asking for God's guidance and direction. Next slide. In the New Testament, a central theme is the kingdom of God, which emphasizes the importance of loving one's neighbor, caring for the poor and oppressed, and challenging unjust systems. Laudato Si suggests that love is not confined to personal relationships, but extends to the civic and political sphere, inspiring actions aimed at improving the conditions of our common home and promoting the well-being of all individuals, again, especially the most vulnerable. Next slide. Jesus challenged unjust systems. He spoke about the religious and social injustices of his day. Jesus criticized the religious leaders and their hypocrisy. He condemned their excessive focus on religious rituals and outward appearances, while neglecting the weightier matters of justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Jesus chastised them for exploiting the poor and marginalized, and he exposed their self-righteousness and greed. Laudato Si also criticizes prevailing systems that contribute to environmental degradation and social injustice. And furthermore, Jesus challenged the oppressive social structures of his time. He frequently associated with those who were considered outcasts and sinners, such as tax collectors, prostitutes, and lepers. And in doing so, he broke social norms, demonstrating God's inclusive love. He emphasized the equal worth and dignity of all individuals, regardless of their social status, and taught his followers to love their neighbors as themselves. In addition, Jesus confronted the economic injustice of his time, particularly by denouncing the exploitations of the poor and the accumulation of wealth at the expense of others. He taught his followers to share their resources, give to the needy, and prioritize the well-being of others over material possessions. And also, Jesus spoke truth to power. He challenged the Pharisees. So Laudato Si draws upon examples from scriptures, such as those that I have just mentioned, both from the Old Testament and the New Testament. And it does so to emphasize our responsibility as stewards of the earth. They call us to be prophets, speak truth to power, challenge unjust systems, and to put our faith into action. Next slide. I also mentioned in my introduction that the theological foundation of resilience and empowerment are also rooted in Catholic social teaching, which emphasizes the dignity of every human person and the common good. Next slide. The principle of the dignity of every human person recognizes that each individual is created in the image of God and therefore has inherent worth and value. This principle calls for a society that values and respects the dignity of every person, regardless of their background or circumstances. This means, and as an example, we have an obligation to provide access to safe, affordable, and stable housing, which is essential for human dignity. Human dignity is recognized in one-to-one meetings where people take the time to visit people in their church and community, share and listen to their stories and needs. And an example of this would be, for example, Carla is a leader from our Faith in Action organization in La Galeana in El Salvador. She overcame her fear because people took time to listen to her. And as a result, she became involved in her community. She is now a strong community leader. And it is because people believed in her and supported her. Next slide. The principle of the common good recognizes that human beings are social beings who live in relationship with one another and with the natural world. This principle calls for a society that promotes the well-being of all its members and fosters the flourishing of the natural world. Community organizing and Laudato Si bring people together, transcending their own self-interest and work towards a greater purpose, resulting in a more cohesive and supportive community. Common good is concretely carried out through community gatherings, through house meetings, through church meetings, where people come together and prioritize their needs and come together over and over to sustain their efforts, always in the context of faith, building a social movement of faith. I'll give another example from El Salvador. Leaders from 200 Catholic parishes came together to campaign for deeds to their land, impacting 350,000 families, which is paving the way for public investment in clean water, electricity, paved roads, green areas, health clinics, and schools. Next slide. In summary, the theological foundations of community resilience and empowerment that underpin Laudato Si action platform is found in the principle of human dignity and justice. It is about upholding and defending the rights and well-being of all members of a community, especially those who are marginalized or oppressed. In the principle of solidarity and community, it is about building relationships, fostering cooperation, and creating a sense of beloved community where everyone can thrive. In the principle of prophetic voice and advocacy, it is about speaking truth to power, challenging systems of injustice, and advocating for social change. In the principle of empowerment and liberation, it is about empowering individuals and communities to take control of their own lives, addressing systemic barriers, and work towards social, economic, and political liberation. In the principle of faith and action, it calls for individuals and communities to engage in transformative action. Faith is not simply a private matter, but rather something that compels people to work for justice, equity, and the common good. It is about faith doing justice. Finally, Laudato Si serves as a call to action, urging us to live out our faith. If we believe that God is active and present in the world, then we need to be responsive to how God is calling us to act, to be disciples and take responsibility for stewardship of the earth, and to prepare for the reign of God, for where nobody is a stranger. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father John. It just feels so wonderful to hear your words and feel my faith for my whole life reinforced. So thank you for that. And we will now move on to Reverend Tanya. Oh, if you have any questions for Father John, just please put it in the Q&A and we'll come back to them. And now I'd love to introduce Reverend Tanya Knock, co-chair for the Care for Creation Committee within Hope. Reverend Tanya Knock is Associate Pastor of Digital Ministry at First United Church of Tampa. She serves as co-chair for the Care for Creation Committee within Hope on the nominating committee of the Florida Conference of the United Church of Christ and the Personnel Committee of Pathways Theological Education, Inc. She earned a BA in psychology from the University of South Florida and is a graduate of Pathways Theological Education, Inc. Welcome, Reverend Tanya. I'm going to stop sharing so you can share.
Hello. Okay, so bear with me, everyone, because me and sharing screens can get a little dicey. So here we go. Elena, I'm trusting you to tell me what you see, okay? Am I showing the right thing? Yes? All right. So good evening, everyone. My name once again is Reverend Tanya Knock, and I'm the Associate Pastor of Digital Ministry for First United Church of Tampa, United Church of Christ. And tonight, my presentation that I'm going to share with you is called The Lord is Willing, but the Creek is Rising. And I'm going to give you some context as to why I have named it as such. There's a little colloquialism that people often share, at least in my culture and sometimes in Southern culture, where they say, you know, I'll see you tomorrow, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. Well, I thought about that. I thought about the fact that it seems to me the Lord is always willing, but we can't deny that the creek is very much rising, it's overflowing, and damage is being caused. So I think it speaks to the both andness of the fact that, yes, God has a responsibility, but I also want to speak to the fact that we as community, as inhabitants of the earth, have responsibility as well. So I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about the importance of caring for creation concerning water quality and flooding, because after all, water is life. I started thinking about that and a scripture popped up for me. Psalm 24 verses 1 through 2. And this is what it says. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. See, water was here long before we got here. And even once we were brought here, think about the fact that for 9 months, we're carried in what? Water. Over 90% of our body is made up of what? Water. Like, there's just not many living things that don't need and use water. So water is life. I was about to say next slide, but then I remembered I'm the one doing my next slide. So, our responsibility, why is this important? And why is it important to me specifically? Because once again, water is life. We can't do anything without water, and we can't, and it's not just about water, but it's the quality of the water. You know, dirty water will make you sick and can make you sick unto death. Not only humans, but animals, plants, all of it. But also, this work is very important to me because I know that nothing can live or thrive without water. And we need good quality, and humans, plants, and animals need water to survive. But here specifically in Tampa, most bodies of surface water in our rivers and bays are considered impaired because they have high concentrations of bacteria such as E. coli and nutrients like nitrate and phosphorus. And everywhere you turn around in Tampa, they're building stuff, so it's becoming a concrete jungle. And as you know, concrete is not what? Porous. So these pollutants come from industry and neighborhood runoff that carries trash, bacteria, heavy metals, oils from parking lots and roads, and vehicle emissions. So we must act now to prevent further contamination and pollution in our communities. So even though I'm speaking about Tampa, I know that Tampa is not unique relative to what it's dealing with. Anywhere where there's humans and there's water, there's some issues going on. I want to talk to you a little bit about my personal experience. You're looking at pictures of my backyard of when it rains, okay? It had only rained for maybe 15 minutes, and it was a heavy rain. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my townhouse. So my townhome complex was built in the 1980s. And when I purchased my townhome back in 2004, never had water stand like it did. So, flooding wasn't an issue back in 2004. But then over time, flooding has become an issue, as you can see, and it is getting worse. Okay, the reasons why it's getting worse is due to poor infrastructure in my neighborhood. And now when it rains, I have to use sandbags at the back of my doors to keep the water from coming in. So I have like these sandbags that they make that you can put down, and when they get wet, they automatically inflate. And so since Florida is the home of the afternoon thunderstorm, this is very concerning because it's like, when is it not raining? Well, we've been in kind of a drought, but for the most part in Florida during the summer, you can count on the fact that between the hours of like 12 noon and 2 p.m., you're gonna get a downpour. And then I think back to last year when Hurricane Ian looked like it was coming directly for Tampa. Had it hit, my sandbags wouldn't have been of much help. It might have slowed the process down, but it wouldn't have prevented the water from overflowing. And so I speak and I advocate about this issue, not only for myself, but on behalf of others who live throughout the various areas in Tampa and beyond, because it's been my experience that if we stay ready, then we won't have to get ready. And I believe by educating people and by talking about the realities of our situation, we can all work together and come to some kind of conclusion and come up with a viable plan to take on more sustainable practices that ensure that we have water, but we also have good quality of water. We have to act right here, right now. So I'm going to share some facts with you. Environmental and climate issues affect our lives every day. Every day. They affect us in the way of our health, our safety, affordable homes, utility bills, and life itself. Flooding and poor water quality in our neighborhoods are dangerous because they cause things like mold. And you know what mold can do. It can affect your ability to breathe. It can affect your ability to sell your home if you want to move. It affects all sorts of things. Flooding worsens our water quality as it washes garbage and chemicals into our drainage ponds, rivers, and bays. I don't know about you, but have you ever driven down the street and seen like trash sitting on top of the drainage system where the water's supposed to flow into the sewer, but so much trash has gone down in the street that it covers the grate and now the water really can't get through? I have. The lack of green spaces found in native trees, plants, and overdevelopment all contribute to flooding as well, which is only intensified by sea level rise, hurricanes, and heavy rainfall. They're only getting worse. According to a 2021 report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, extreme sea level events that occurred once per century in the recent past are projected to occur at least annually at more than half of all tide gauge locations by 2100. I don't know about you, but I find that a bit concerning. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, green infrastructure found in trees, specific native plants, bioswales, rain gardens, and green spaces can mitigate flood risk. It's our job to ensure our communities are equipped with the necessary tools it needs to become and or stay environmentally sustainable. In short, how we're living right now isn't looking good and isn't going to guarantee that we'll live much better. So these are the kind of discussions we have to have. These are the things we have to educate ourselves about. And these are the things that we have to make a commitment to do to ensure that there is water and good water. So I am on the Care for Creation Committee within Hope. And one of the things the committee that I'm on has been specifically addressing in this season is flooding and water quality. And so you can see some sketches where what it looks like right now and what we hope things will look like to be more sustainable. These are our goals and our plans. These are what we're talking with our local politicians about. These are the things that we're lobbying for, trying to get them to understand, hey, you need to care, because just because it's not happening in your neighborhood yet doesn't mean that it won't happen. It's a human issue, and that transcends class, color, faith, all of it. We share Earth, so we all need to take care of Earth. Environmental change has disrupted lives across my county. Increased flooding displaces families, drives up insurance prices, like Florida as an example. And I don't know if you've been paying attention to news, but farmers insurance has actually pulled out of Florida relative to insuring people's homes. So, hey, we got issues there too. So it drives up insurance prices and creates hotter days, which means higher utility bills, all right? Because if you don't have AC, that's an issue because you can literally cook to death. Ongoing pollution breeds asthma and cancers. Recently, I decided to become a co-chair for my local justice ministry committee called Care for Creation. So I'm fairly new to this, so bear with me. This committee is meant to explore issues of climate and environmental justice, and we do it through our listing process. We meet with families and people out in the community and find out what are they up against, what are they dealing with, what are their concerns, and we then take those concerns, we vote and we take those concerns to specific people so that they can be addressed. And one of the biggest concerns right now is exploring solutions specifically around flooding and water quality. So I want to talk a little bit about the problem. You see these pictures? These are actual pictures from the Tampa Bay area when it rains. One is daylight, one is at night. But do you see how high that water is? And then, as people drive, it shifts the water even more. Water hits your alternator just right, it can stall you out. The next thing you know, you're floating down the street. It's just not a good look. During our 2021 and 2022 listing process, we heard stories of people's homes, congregations, and roads being impacted by flooding, contributing to mold, building damage, and the inability to leave or return their homes or place of businesses safely. Many people fear what flooding, pollution, and mold is doing to their health. And probably even more so now as we continue to live with COVID. During our research, we learned of potential funds to improve stormwater ponds. Tampa has over 242 stormwater drainage ponds that collect and hold and move water. In certain areas, these ponds can be strengthened to benefit the health and well-being of residents and the environment. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that could happen. So we've been having these conversations, we've been identifying problems, and then we come together to talk about what are some of the solutions. And as we come up with solutions, these are the solutions that we take forward to, our politicians, or as I like to call them, the people who are supposed to be servants of the public. We voted for them, therefore, They should be serving us. They should be listening to our concerns. But I digress. So here are some questions that we have been asking our local politicians. Number one, will you instruct city staff to complete conceptual designs for 5 of 7 East Tampa ponds by August 1st? We're talking about this August 1st. So what? That's roughly 2.5, 3 weeks away. So we're holding them to it. Will you instruct city staff to strengthen these 5 ponds this year with native trees and plants that reduce flooding and improve water quality? So we want to know, will you do it, and will you start doing it right now? This is not a work that's for far off. It's for right now. The sooner we get started, the better chances are of mitigating damage that has already occurred. And finally, we have asked them, will you take steps to ensure the inclusion of green infrastructure principles in Tampa Stormwater Design Manual for future stormwater ponds? So it's not just about what's happening now. We want to know, will you take up these practices of sustainability for future? So through our research, we decided to challenge the city, and those are the ways that we challenge them. So what I would like to do, I'm going to move to the next slide, and I'm going to show you some of the results of what we've been asking for. So I don't know if you can see how I'm moving my little pointer, but this is one of the stormwater ponds that got redesigned. It is located off of Martin Luther King Avenue, ironically across from Nathan B. Young Junior High School, which is the junior high school I went to. And it stands out to me because I remember that when I was in 7th grade, this pond literally looked like a hole in the ground. But they took it and they redesigned it. They even put a very nice kiosk up there that you can walk around and you can have a picnic there. And in this next picture, you can see ducks and you can see some of the foliage that they have planted to contribute to it being a healthier space. And then this final, hold on, I went too fast. This final picture right here shows you even more of that green space. And so I love the fact that not only does it look nicer, but it's not just about the optics, it's actually about the function. So moral to the story, something can be beautiful and functional. Hey, remember that, humans, we're beautiful and functional. I digress. The other thing that I love about this pond specifically, because when I went to visit it, I took pictures, is that they've also put information out there that anyone can read that educates them about the purpose of the pond, and what it does, so they actually took some of the research that the University of South Florida did and put it in a format that the public could readily digest and actually put it at the pond. So while people are there, they can read, it talks about low impact development, what a green living roof is, what a rain barrel is and the function of it, and just talks more about the research, water awareness, research, and education. So I think that is awesome that they're doing that. I know I'm actually closing. So here's what I want to say in my closing. You might wonder, why do I think it's important and urgent that we combat climate change now? Well, I'll tell you why. Because if we're being honest, the clock is ticking, and the point of no return will eventually come if we don't act now. So for myself in my life, a question that I often ask myself when I am wrestling with something of great importance is, Tanya, do you want your future more than your past? And I found that whatever my answer is to that question will inform my behaviors and actions that I take in the present. So that's the question that I would like to leave us as a community to ponder. Do we want our future more than we want our past. Because if we're being honest, our actions or lack thereof indicates not necessarily. So here's what I do know for sure, or at least what I believe. I believe that the Lord is more than willing. I also believe that we are more than able and capable. So the creek doesn't have to rise, and it doesn't have to wash us away. So let us work with spirit, earth, and each other to literally turn the tide. May it be so. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Tanya. Such a wonderful example and super practical and inspiring. And so if you have questions for Reverend Tanya, please put them in the Q&A and we will come back to them. And now I'd love to introduce our third speaker, Dwayne David Paul, contributing writer to National Catholic Reporter and co-founder of Religion in Revolt. Dwayne David Paul is a Brooklyn-born son of immigrants from Trinidad and Tobago. As a theological educator and activist, his work focuses on faith, race, and justice. Dwayne's writing has appeared in the Hartford Courant, Connecticut Mirror, Sojourners, America Magazine, and the National Catholic Reporter, where he is a contributing writer. He is the co-founder of Religion in Revolt, a multimedia interfaith social justice platform that develops and promotes the liberation work of religious communities. Dwayne is a past fellow of the Black Theology and Leadership Institute at Princeton Theological Seminary and holds a master's degree in religion from Yale Divinity School. Welcome, Dwayne.
Hi, good evening. Thanks so much for having me, Elena, and the Catholic Climate Covenant team. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to the sisters associated with the Collaborative Center for Justice here in Hartford, as well as, to my really pleasant surprise, Dr. Eileen Poyani of my alma mater, St. Peter's University, the Jesuit University of New Jersey. Dr. Poyani has been a trailblazer of women's access to Catholic higher education. So this is a really beautiful coalescence of some of the awesome Catholic women of my professional life. So I will just share my screen here and get started. One of the things that was important to me was to discuss the broad-based coalition building around climate of the sort that Father John and Reverend Tanya participate in, and how we do that. So in Laudato Si, chapter 4 is where it's at. The whole book's important. Read the whole book, but read chapter 4 twice. I think the wisdom of Pope Francis's approach, as he lays out his integral ecology in chapter 4, is that it begins almost immediately with a discussion of poverty, the plight of the world's poor and working class people, and how these social conditions and the environmental degradation that we see all around us didn't just crop up together incidentally. They constitute one another. They reflect and shape each other. They're two sides of the same problem. And so he claims that the opposite is also true. He says in paragraph 139, which is in chapter 4, strategies for a solution demand an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time protecting nature. So for Pope Francis, we have to pursue policy aims that operationalize the preferential option for the poor, which is one of the principles of Catholic social teaching, but really is at the heart of the gospel and our account of love and justice. And it is three sets of overlapping claims, right? Number one, it's a theological claim, right? That says God has a special love. God loves us all. It is universal. God is love. However, that love is of a special care and concern for those who are made vulnerable. It's an ethical claim that says we are bound, right, to emulate that love in our interpersonal dealings, and in particular, the sort of preference for those who are made vulnerable. And it's also a political claim that says that we should organize our communal lives and the institutions that constitute our communal lives in accordance with the values, with those same values. Thanks for coming. That's the entire presentation. That is literally everything that I will write. That's everything that you'll read from me. I have very little to add from that. Seriously, that is, I cannot emphasize enough that is the entire presentation. It's not, I'll like not give Elena and the others too hard of a time. But one of the things I want to highlight before moving on from this discussion of the option is this point of that people are made vulnerable. And that's especially important because Father John, Tenya, and myself, in one form or another, we're touching on sort of public policy issues and poverty. And so I want to just sort of highlight that vulnerability, as we describe it politically, isn't entirely, but it's almost entirely, or to a great degree, socially constituted. So, for example, that someone might experience some sort of emergency that'll cost them $1,000. We could attribute that to bad luck, just part of being human, right? However, that such an emergency would be financially catastrophic for the masses of poor and working class people. That vulnerability is made and manufactured, right? Because human beings, a part of being human is being vulnerable to the vicissitudes of life. Not making allowance for that in a country awash with financial resources, that is a policy choice not to fund basic human needs. So, unfortunately, not all policy solutions take this as a starting point. As I see it, there are three prevailing alternatives in sort of US public policy around climate. And I want to sort of touch on each of them individually before moving on to what I think is most comports to Pope Francis's vision. Importantly, I'm not just sort of highlighting these alternatives for their own sake, but because, you know, they're also areas of need for outreach to your legislators. Sometimes an important part of advocacy is killing a bill, right? Sometimes we have to call our legislators and say, hey, I might not know the solution to the problem, but I do know this ain't it. So first, there is largely what's been the US response, which is to say little to no action to reverse climate change with some efforts at adaptation. Now, the quiet part that no politician wants to say out loud is that we aren't facing a climate crisis. There ain't no we, not a single one, at least, that will be impacted equally by a changing climate. Pardon me, I'm having. And so Western militaries have been incredibly transparent on this last point. So for instance, since its 2012 since its 2012 document called Climate Change Adaptation Roadmap, the US Pentagon has been preparing for the likely, quote, greater competition for more limited and critical life-sustaining resources like food and water, end quote, brought about by a changing climate. Many of the would-be immigrants who have faced the militarized responses from our government at the southern border are themselves climate migrants from the so-called dry corridor of Central America, that is a drought-stricken region that has been drought-stricken for an incredibly long time. The second approach claims that population growth from poorer communities exacerbates not only poverty, but also the climate crisis. But as the Union of Concerned Scientists notes, this assumption allows the countries most responsible for the changing climate, both historically and at present, to evade responsibility for the impact of their pollution. It assumes that all people are equally responsible, so the poorer, darker nations producing more people are somehow to blame. In fact, the exact opposite is true. The richest individuals in the world are responsible for the greatest emissions. In fact, without changes to their consumption patterns, the International Energy Agency notes the top 10% of the emitters alone will blow through the carbon budget needed to reach net zero emissions by the year 2050. Once again, the top 10% of emitters by themselves, if they don't change their actions and they don't change their consumption patterns, will blow through the rest of the entire world's carbon budget. So the final policy approach aims to use technology to reverse a changing climate, which is great, but it does so while making minimal changes to consumption and production patterns. This is a part of what Pope Francis describes as an uncritical faith in technological advancement, grounded in delusions of human grandeur. In fact, if you read not only Laudato Si, but so much of Pope Francis's writings, he is incredibly critical of this blind faith in technology. And it may seem harsh, but some technological solutions proposed are aimed at maintaining the continued expansion of Western consumption. And just to note, he's not being anti-scientific when he's saying this, but he's locating the problem not just in our minds, right? We don't find ourselves in this situation simply because we lack knowledge, right? Or simply because we're ignorant, but there is sort of broader problems with like beliefs and worldviews that sees the world as endlessly consumable, right? In particular, he's gotten some pushback from more conservative elements in the church for his criticisms of Western colonialism, right? So if you've ever seen the old Manifest Destiny painting and the westward expansion imagery, right? The whole ethos is filled with imagery and ideas that all the trees, all the extractable goods, the water, this is simply endless and is fit for our endless consumption. And that is the sort of, and for our domination, right, of both nature and other human beings. And that is the ethos that he is deeply critical of, right? So, his criticism in a vacuum seems harsh until you sort of see some of the technological solutions being put forth that evince this same kind of hubris, right? So the same people, the same billionaires, some of them who can't manage to keep social media platforms like Twitter from imploding on themselves, are planning to solve climate change by doing things such as altering how much sunlight reaches the earth, by releasing tons of aerosols into the atmosphere, or controlling the weather by seeding rain clouds into drought-stricken areas. And again, this is in part because a successful economy, as we understand it, we as in sort of West, the measure of a successful economy is gross domestic product, which itself is a measure of consumption, right? So even how we understand success, and even how we understand within a capitalist economy, within the West, how we understand human flourishing is based on GDP, right? Is based on consumption, and that is a part of the sort of the logic that Francis is criticizing throughout the document. So, and also those of us who are in search of technological solutions that aren't quite as insane as filling the sky with smoke or controlling the weather, I think we can also be sort of guilty of this same logic, right? Some of the raw materials, in use for slightly saner, green solutions are also finite, right? And take mining. That might be okay in the interim, but we need to be sober and really judicious about that. What we don't need now is a shift to sort of green imperialism, right? Where we can't go from plundering for oil to toppling governments for access to their lithium reserves. And obviously lithium ion is the stuff that these rechargeable batteries are made from for your electric vehicles and such. And so one last approach that I think is worth mentioning along the theme of community resilience is the personal and institutional concern for so-called carbon footprints. This is a solutions framework that we need to build upon, but only build upon it if we can subordinate it to the type of collective political action that Father John and Reverend Tanya participate in and are talking about, right? So people of faith are remarkably successful at transforming the institutional lives of their houses of worship. So for example, a February 2023 Berkeley Labs report found that houses of worship host a disproportionately high rate of solar panels when compared to other non-residential buildings. Wonderful. But even this study's findings capture the limitations of a personal or institutional morality model. Houses of worship with solar arrays were disproportionately located in relatively wealthy, white, educated census tracts. But we need everyone to reverse the climate crisis. And politics is the way we do that. And I say that, and I think, Father John and Reverend Tanya might have found similar reactions in their faith-based community organizing as I have in mine, where, there's a great anxiety around in the pews across religions and across denominations with getting too political, right? But politics, not just, individually internalizing, a sense of a carbon footprint, or in our church, internalizing these sort of standards, but we transform collective life through political action. So the harms of this model, in a vacuum are many, but two important ones to me stand out. One, it immobilizes us politically by encouraging us to focus on personal and institutional consumption. In doing that, we lose focus on government and corporate actors. This carbon footprint framework was literally invented by one of history's most prolific polluters, British Petroleum, BP. And they made this in consultation with the public relations firm Ogilvy and Mather. You can still find the website if you sort of look up BP carbon footprint website, and it even lets you calculate your personal or household annual emissions. What the BP calculator won't tell you, though, is that the US military is the world's greatest institutional consumer of fossil fuels, and therefore the most prolific emitter of greenhouse gases. It shouldn't be surprising that the company would not want to alienate its industry's best customer. As noted in a 2019 Watson Institute report, these emissions are generated, yes, during our perpetual warfare, but also in the maintenance of the nation's 800 plus military bases and war games and non-combat operations, right? So how Congress allocates funds, federal dollars to maintain our self-destructive state of affairs, that's actionable only to citizens, not consumers. The magnitude of the crisis we face demands that we prioritize political action to regulate producers and have our policy priorities align with the masses of working class people. Whether we like it or not, we pursue policy. The policies we pursue dictate the allies that we choose and the priorities that we make. And so, for example, if we take transportation, which accounted for the largest share of greenhouse gas emissions in 2021, it accounted for 28% of emissions in the US. How might we choose a solution that fits with the interests of most working class people? Right now, please don't let the takeaway be that like Dwayne hates electric vehicles and paper straws, even though I complain about both of them. It's not. But by the end of 2022, an electric vehicle costs $61,000 on average, $61,488. As a solution, as a focus for as a policy priority focus, a $61,000 car is wholly irrelevant to the lives of many most working class people, right? Half of American workers earn less than $35,000 in 2019. In 2021, 53 million people sought aid from soup kitchens and pantries and other programs. So who is that as a policy priority? I'm not saying we shouldn't have them, but as a policy priority that we want to mobilize people behind and get them interested in, who's that for? A campaign to overhaul the nation's small and retrograde public transportation infrastructure, though, that would improve the lives, the day-to-day lives of more people who need it most. Both the rural and urban poor, the elderly, children are increasingly find themselves stranded and unable to access basic human needs due to lack of transportation options. Personal EVs won't help them, but an electrified, modern public transportation sector can. The final area for movement building that I'd like to discuss is international solidarity. This is an area that, again, Pope Francis has been really sharp on. The only way that the masses of everyday people get through this crisis is together. That is one of the important through lines connecting Laudato Si and his most recent encyclical on the universal human family, Fratelli Tutti. Right now, as Americans, we need to choose between climate justice and remaining the world's lone superpower. We can have domination, or we can have broad-based human flourishing, but we can't have both. Just this Sunday, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on CNN State of the Union that China should be pressured to, quote, take significant substantial action in reducing emissions and fighting climate change. So we're antagonizing China on the front of climate diplomacy. And of course, just this year, the Pentagon announced that we are building or refurbishing an additional 9 military bases in the Philippines, to say nothing of the 28,500 service members stationed in our permanent outposts in Korea, plus the 300 military sites in East Asia alone. Will we cooperate and survive and flourish, or will we just dominate instead? And so finally, when I directed the Collaborative Center for Justice, which is a social justice organization founded by Catholic women religious here in Connecticut, we participated in a successful statewide advocacy campaign to fund upgrades to Connecticut's affordable housing stock. They were aimed at remediating common environmental hazards found in old units such as lead and rayon, as well as subsidizing energy efficiency upgrades such as solar panels and insulation. We were proud to advocate for SB 356, the bill, as a Catholic organization, because as proposed, it fit Pope Francis's model for climate policy solutions. On the one hand, it aimed to reduce the state's greenhouse gas emissions, but it did so in a way that privileged the interests of Connecticut's working class residents. And so people of faith have to build upon the person by person, institution by institution engagement with environmental issues that has been really fruitful, right, in our congregations, by further entering into the fray of politics. The Pope's vision of integral ecology does not see poverty reduction and climate change reversal as two separate tasks. Centering working class people, as Pope Francis advises, is more than just ethical, it's politically expedient. We are the majority, and we're also not doing well. Among workers, most of us are either living through a financial crisis or we're on the precipice of one. Any integral approach to either poverty relief or to the climate crisis must address the other as well, and in so doing, create the conditions for a broad-based, diverse movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. Oh my gosh, so many big, huge concepts. And thank you for sharing them in such a cohesive way with us. So if we could all go on screen, I have a couple questions, and then I've been reading the questions we've been getting, and thank you, everyone. And one question I had that came to me from the very beginning as Father John was speaking, and that I feel like Dwayne and Reverend Tanya touched upon, is how does faith inform your community work, and vice versa? How does the community work inform your faith? For example, Father John said that resilience is comes from the idea of learning to trust each other, but like our faith in God is literally trusting God. And so how do we, how does that become circular? And can any of you or all of you speak to that?
I'll answer from my experience is being in relationship with people, the experience that I have from learning from everyday people, their learning from them has really shaped my values, my principles, and my motivation. As a result, my faith becomes more alive in the struggle for justice. because of my relationship with people. They teach me, and they teach me how to love. And in so doing, how important it is to move forward and work for justice, as I say.
Thank you, Father John. Dwayne or Reverend Tanya, did either of you want to speak to that?
May I hear the question again? Because I had a little technical difficulty. Please.
Yeah, I really love the idea of how does your faith inform your community work and vice versa. How does that community work then come back and inform your faith?
How my faith informs my community work is, I know for me and at my church, when we say the Lord's Prayer, normally people say the word kingdom. We don't, we say kingdom. And one day I asked my pastor, I said, well, why do we say it? What's the difference? And she said, kingdom speaks to power. Kingdom speaks to community and relationship. And so that's how my faith informs what I'm doing, is because I recognize that whether I like you or not, I share this earth with you, you share it with me. And so what I try to focus on is, what do we have in common? How do we build bridges? Because it's been my experience that it's okay to have boundaries, because boundaries do exist for our protection, but barriers exist for our division. And too many times people have confused the two. They have defined what is actually a barrier. They've called it a boundary, which has kept us separate. And so here's what I know. We run out of water, your faith, whether you have it or not, your color, whether you have that or not, your orientation, whether you have one or not, all of that won't matter in the end. What's going to matter to you is, what do we have to do in order for us to live? And the thing is, none of us can do it alone. God designed us to be communal. Now, we, on the other hand, have twisted that, but we were meant to exist together. We were meant to coexist, and we were meant to do this work together. And my final thing relative to how my faith informs how I work in the community, back to the Lord's Prayer. Why are we saying, thy will be done in the earth as it is in heaven, but we won't do the work to create heaven on earth? Jesus spoke more about our conditions here than the afterlife. So I don't understand how this whole concept of heaven became a concept of something you go into once you die, instead of experiencing it right here. That's all I got.
Thank you, Tanya.
Yeah, most importantly, Jesus was born in a manger in Bethlehem and not a palace in Rome. And that's the whole thing, man. that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel that. One thing that I wanted to ask Dwayne, you said vulnerability is socially constructed, and I thought about my daughters. We were driving to the dentist, and my daughter said, "Oh, it just there's a camera measuring people's speed," and she said, "I guess if you're rich, you could pay your tickets, and then you'll just never get a boot on your car." I was like, "Yeah, I never thought about that." And then my other daughter was like, "Yeah, and then if you get a boot on your car, then you can't go to work. And then if you can't go to work, then you're going to be in jail." And I was like, they get it, right? They already get this. But when I was growing up, and this is a question for all three, super Catholic, Mexican immigrant family, you don't make any waves. You just pray to God, and you're like a good person, and you follow the rules of our church and our faith. And somehow that's so far apart for many communities to think of what Father John was saying, speaking truth to power, and so can you three speak to that in your own way of how to kind of bridge that gap, that idea that speaking truth to power is like kind of being like not a good person or a good Catholic,
I
and
would love to.
challenging those social constructs. Go ahead, sorry.
I'd love to jump at that one. First and foremost, let me divulge. I am not Catholic, but that's okay. All right. For me, speaking truth to power is part of doing that which is just, because part of God's love is God's justice. How can we consistently talk about love but don't take actions that are loving? And part of being loving is you got to call things exactly what they are, and you have to address it head on. I think my personal opinion, one of the greatest failures of society is this whole thing about being civil. I'm not saying we should be nasty. However, what I am saying, people have gotten so caught up in the art of being civil that they don't really tell the truth about anything anymore. It's about, oh, that hurt my feelings. Look, your feelings will heal eventually. But the truth is, if we don't talk about these things, if we don't make the necessary changes, then we're all going to be in a world of hurt. So I'm that person. Give it to me straight. Even if it hurts my feelings, my little feelings are healed. What I need to know is if I am in a particular situation that needs to be turned around and you know how to do it, give me the information so I can make an informed decision. People are so afraid now of having hard conversations that they're siloed. We're all sitting in our heads thinking things, but it's like, thinking doesn't move stuff. I mean, it starts with a thought, but once you have the thought, you have to take an action. And the first action is having the willingness to dialogue, having the willingness to have those uncomfortable conversations, because a lot of it is uncomfortable. But we have to do it. So, yeah, I don't think speaking truth to power makes you a bad person. Matter of fact, I think your faith should inform that. I really, really do, because we all know you don't have to say anything necessarily for things to be bad. A lot of times it's not what's being said, it's about what's not being said. It's about people choosing to not engage in a conversation because they take the attitude, well, that really has nothing to do with me. Well, let me put you on game. If you are human and there's a human somewhere else being mistreated, that does have everything to do with you. Thank you.
I talked about Carla in El Salvador. Through organizing, she was a very shy housewife, and through one-to-ones, she got engaged. And as a result of that, she started to participate in the organizing. And eventually she became a spokesperson at one of the major meetings that we had with the mayor in that city. So it's part of people if reaching out to people and listening to people and then allowing them to participate together to make changes. And it's a real revolution that takes place. I've seen in so many people.
Yeah, I guess all I would add is, the faith isn't, the faith might come down from the sky, but it isn't transmitted that way, right? Our faith, our tradition is passed down through human institutions and human beings that are invested in, cultures and interests. And a part of what we do is sort of suss that out, right? Not and recognize that the Magnificat for me is one of the most like important prayers that we learn, right? And Mary's words in response to, being told that she would give birth to Jesus, is about overturning expectations and overturning societal norms, and giving pride of place to the weak, and privileging those who, again, are made vulnerable. And so at the introduction of Jesus, we get the introduction of these values. And I think if it was good enough for Mary, it's good enough for me.
That's beautiful. So one last question that I wish we had more time, but I did read a couple questions here that speak to this. People were inspired by your different work and your different initiatives. And Reverend Tanya, a couple of people were saying they liked that process that you had of like listening, and others were asking like how, in a way, like how do you get started if you want to do this kind of work? And what challenges might you have faced that could be expected, or how did you approach those? That's a big, long question. So just touch any part of it that you can in the few minutes we have left.
Okay.
All three, please.
So in Hope itself, the listing process is just a part of what the organization does, no matter what committee you are on within Hope. So that process isn't just specific to Care for Creation. That is how the whole organization decides what its committees are going to, for lack of a better way to say it, lobby and bring forward to politicians, if you will. And so what that entails, first of all, Hope is an organization made up of various faith-based organizations, a lot of churches, a lot of different faiths. We have Protestant, we have Catholic, we have Islamic, Seventh-day Adventist. Like it's a veritable religious buffet up in there. But we all come together for the purpose of improving conditions for humans in our congregations and in our counties. And so there's a season, we're about to go into it now. I think it goes from like September into December, where we do what you would call a house party, where our Justice Network members will start talking to friends and family, people in their neighborhood. Hey, what are your concerns? Would you be willing, to come to a house meeting and share your story? Because stories have power. And stories need to come from the people. This is not a top-down process. It's a bottom-up process, And so we keep it very grassroots because we stay on the ground with the people, finding out what are your needs, what is that thing, if you had 5 things to choose from and we had to narrow it down to 3, what would your 3 be? What's hot? And that's how we get it. And then we just keep encouraging people to share their story. And then some people are willing to come forth publicly in the bigger meetings, And so when we're calling our politicians out, they get to actually see the faces of the people, the literal people who are dealing with these things. So it's not a case of us standing in as intermediaries like, hey, Dwayne, tell me your story, and then I'm going to go tell it for you. No, Dwayne, I'm going to walk with you and I'm going to support you as you stand and you deliver your truth. That's how we do it.
Yeah. Father John or Dwayne, did you have any thoughts on that question?
No, she said very well, the importance of listening to people. And I always say in listening to people, people come up with the creative imaginations. And through that, it's amazing how people with their ideas and through listening, identify their concerns, come together, and they can move mountains.
Absolutely.
I think Father John mentioned one-on-ones, these relational meetings that are about establishing intentional public relationships. the best thing you can do is first start to know your neighbor, and start there.
Thank you. Yes, Dwayne taught me a 101 on community organizing. So I'm already learning a lot. Thank you for that. Well, I am going to close us out here. It's been so wonderful to work with the three of you these past few weeks and to get to know you and your different approaches. Thank you so much for being here and for everyone for your wonderful questions. We have 2 more sessions to close out our conference series next week, July 25th, Response to the Cry of the Earth. And on July 27th, next week, is our closing award ceremony. So come back and see who's doing great work in the US as far as being Laudato Si champions. So we are going to close out with a prayer from Thomas Merton. It says, "We are one with you. Oh God, we are one with you. You have made us one with you. You have taught us that if we are open to one another, you dwell in us. Help us to preserve this openness and to fight for it with all our hearts. Help us to realize that there can be no understanding where there is mutual rejection. Oh God, in accepting one another wholeheartedly, fully, completely, we accept you and we thank you and we adore you. And we love you with our whole being because our being is your being. Our spirit is rooted in your spirit. Fill us then with love and let us be bound together with love as we go our diverse ways, united in this one spirit which makes you present in the world and which makes you witness to the ultimate reality that is love. Love has overcome. Love is victorious. Amen. So thank you, Reverend Tanya. Thank you, Father John. Thank you, Dwayne, so much. And thank you, everyone, for coming